Thanks, Chair. First of all, congratulations, and to Tim, Deputy Lombard, congratulations, Minister, you're welcome, and I congratulate you, and to also welcome the two department officials, Paul and Sinead. A few quick questions, Minister. In the line of Brexit, is there a tie-up between you and, say, the Department of Transport, and touching on, be it meat exports, haulage, sheep, cattle, and the live export sector, and involved with that, say that you're liaising with ports and that. What are we looking at, in your opinion, in the line of tariffs? I know if they're on the hoof, they're cheaper. Are you concerned that the likes of Asda has announced today that they are not going buying, that they're going basically buying all British beef? Will sheep, or what tariff will be on sheep coming in from Northern Ireland into Southern Ireland? Are you concerned, or when are you going to address the animal health remedies, the debate that's going on there, where, look, the reality of it is, if this goes to the veterinary sector with Brexit and that, there's a danger that there'll be stuff smuggled across the border, that we need to allow the veterinary shops to continue, even if it's a derogation for 10 years or whatever. In relation to the Department of Agriculture, why, or can you confirm, why did the Department not support the Banagher project when we need as many plants as possible in the line of killing cattle, and would be of benefit if they're heading for China, because they'd be heading on to a further land? Also, I know that there's 3 or 4 PGI status applications in at the moment. There seems to be a delay on some of them at the moment. I know there's one in for suckler, natural Irish beef, but there seems to be a delay. Is there a lack of people employed in that sector looking after it? In the line of CAP, Minister, and Pillar 2, you spoke and I supported you on the suckler welfare, where you want to bring in for the cow a suckler scheme when you were in opposition. Will that be coming in the budget? Is it what's for sheep or tillage? The young farmers, is there an emphasis going to be on them? Like others, the Mercosur, I want to hear your views on that. And in the line of TAMS, what are you looking at in the future of that? One thing, Minister, I just want to hear your thoughts on, and I think we would support every young farmer getting up and running. You give them basically entitlements. But I see a loophole as well after year 2 that's happening. And you know, you have to be a genuine farmer to be doing this, in my opinion. But there's a loophole where the year 2 they can lease them entitlements out, and they're not farming. And I think, look, we have to be blunt about this. That has to be addressed. That you cannot just get a lump of money one year, lease it out, and don't have to be farming after that. I think we need to nib that at the bud. What's your view on convergence and the environmental schemes? I know that you have said the EU is coming to decide on something, but there's a lot of farmers that would have leased land. They're coming to the end. They don't know what to do. In the line of COVID, there's a PCS, this gear here that we spray on ourselves coming in and washing our hands. It's your department that gives that PCS number. Why is there a 6 months delay in companies that are trying to get that number in your department at the moment? And are you concerned, Minister? I know that you didn't talk about forestry. I know that there was plenty on about it last week. A lot of our timber is going to England with Brexit. When will that bill be signed in? And in the first few weeks, if there isn't a sign, are you prepared to go further and drive this on? In the line, I've noticed on Dundee and different outlets at the moment, this famous letter that went out to farmers where they're now advertising their cattle and saying, I'm top of the pops, I never had a reactor. And this is starting to show now when people are selling cattle. Will there be something done to stop this type of this going on? Because you're going to end up with like 2 different societies trying to sell cattle on Dundee or whatever outlet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and thanks to all the members for their comprehensive questions and for their good wishes as well. To start off, Chairperson, you asked the question in relation to the Banagher meat plant, and it was asked later on as well. The situation is, I think the Department are expecting a report in the submission in the next short period of time, and we'll consider that whenever it is received. In relation to Senator Daly's questions, he started off in relation to a question on COVID and the impact on live exports. And yes, it is true, given the drop in demand on the continent for veal this year certainly did lead to a reduction. It was balanced somewhat in relation to increased live exports of older calves, but not fully so. But certainly, it is something we'll have to keep an eye on, Senator. You also mentioned the importance of maintaining marts and keeping them open. I know last night, obviously, or as of tonight, all of the country will be moving to level 3 on the 5-level scale. Under level 3, marts will continue to operate as they did under level 2, under the protocols that they would have already agreed with the local department veterinary offices. So they will, and I accept absolutely your point in relation to the importance of those and the important role that they play, and also would acknowledge the tremendous work that marts have done in relation to implementing those operating protocols, and in terms of continuing to provide a service, a very well working service to the farming community during this time. In relation to department inspections under COVID, and if it's holding back appeals or not, there isn't any backlog in inspections within the department, Senator Daly. And I know Board BIA have moved over the COVID period to remote or to online inspections as well. And I think that has certainly made a significant contribution in relation to their inspections. With regard to Brexit, you mentioned the tripartite arrangements and the situation at the moment with regard to horses from France, and that is something that is certainly a concern in relation to the ongoing negotiations with Brexit. That tripartite agreement is very important in relation to the movement of horses. It's something, obviously, will be subject to the Brexit outcome, but it's something we will be doing all we can to try and ensure that there's a positive outcome in relation to. In relation to the Common Agricultural Policy, you were asking in relation to what flexibilities there would be for the transition period, and with regard to COVID money as well as part of that transition. So, the transition regulations have still not been fully agreed, but certainly it has been indicated in relation to existing schemes that the potential will be there to roll those over, and that's certainly something that I will be prioritising in terms of trying. I think it's really important that we, particularly given the year that we're going into, that we do have schemes continuing for farmers. Obviously, in terms of the following on from the transition regulations, and whenever we get the CAP strategic plans agreed, which will in all likelihood last for 5 years from the start of 2023 onwards, then the new schemes and all will be fully fleshed out and thrashed out in relation to those. But certainly, as we go into next year, it's really important we do give stability and stability of income, and also stability of outputs, and that there's significant outputs that are being achieved as a result of those schemes as well. In relation to Deputy Carthy, you brought up the issue of transitional payments as well, and the importance of the existing schemes, and certainly that's something I would agree on, and that I have indicated I very strongly feel myself that it's important that we do ensure that there's a continuation and that there isn't a gap in relation to schemes there, and that's something that I'm working very hard on at the moment to try and achieve as part of the budget estimates process. Obviously, we shall see what that still has to be concluded, but certainly it is my objective to ensure that we do ensure that there's a continuation and a strong, steady continuation in terms of those schemes for farmers in the year ahead. You made the point in relation to the REP scheme and the fact that there shouldn't be any gap years, and again, it speaks to the same point in relation to the importance of avoiding, because they're really important schemes in terms of income to farmers, but they're also really important schemes in terms of what they're delivering in terms of the public good, what they're delivering in terms of environment, what they're delivering in terms of biodiversity. And it's a missed opportunity if farmers don't have the opportunity to participate in them and to contribute in that regard, as well as be paid for the work that they're doing. In relation to the Mercosur trade deal, that's certainly something that I expressed real concern on, without a doubt, and it is something that is concerning from a beef point of view. I think we have commissioned an impact assessment of that, which we would expect to receive in the near future, and that certainly will inform how we approach that issue going forward. Also, I think the key thing which has been raised as well is the fact that there needs to be, we can't have a situation where there's anything that is not equivalent in standards, and that would be stood over, that anything that is coming into the EU has to, from a quality point of view and from an environmental point of view, can't be of a lower standard than what we are producing here. And I think that's an essential qualification as well in relation to how the Mercosur deal would be considered. With regard to COVID and support for suckler sector and a payment for these, certainly, Deputy, I think our beef sector is a really important one, and as I outlined previously, the importance of continuing the supports that are there and working to try and ensure we support the sector. I think in relation to going forward, we're obviously going to have 2 transitional years now, moving from the previous cap to the next one, and I think there's going to require a lot of engagement and consideration there as to how we support incomes in the suckler sector in terms of the new cap strategic plan. But certainly, and we very much welcome the committee's input and considerations in that regard as well. But certainly, coming up to this budget now, the importance of ensuring we can continue to support those schemes that are there is a priority. In relation to Brexit, you mentioned plans for Irish farmers and plans to protect them. So again, that's a consideration, and now that we're engaging with the government on in terms of the estimates process, it is absolutely essential that we do have contingency plans there for the potential of a no-deal Brexit, and certainly the budget has been framed in the context that a no-deal Brexit is the base consideration, so in terms of the National Exchequer, we're engaging with Ministers McGrath and Ministers O'Donoghue in that regard, but also then I think in terms of the European European side of things and the Brexit Adjustment Fund, where €5 billion was put aside at European level for potential for Brexit adjustment. I think it's essential in the event of a shock to the system and of a good deal not being an outcome, and obviously that's our objective, but that we would get a very significant proportion of that and be in a position to fully support our agri-food sector during that period and from the undoubted change that would and shock that would ensue. The Deputy Danny Healy-Rae mentioned the glass scheme and the importance of that, and again, that's something I've touched on and I would concur with. He mentioned the fair deal scheme as well, and as he said, was something that was addressed in the Dáil today, and the Taoiseach got responded to, and that is something working with Minister Mary Butler, I will liaise with her on. I know it's a scheme that she is very keen to progress. And in relation to the importance of supports for young farmers as well, I take Deputy Healy-Rae's emphasis on that and the importance of supporting them. And certainly, as we frame the next cap, it's something that it's supports to encourage generational renewal will be very important. Senator Boyhan, in relation to the need to encourage horticulture and forestry, that is both of those are key objectives in relation to the programme for government, and certainly as we go forward year on year, we will want to see both sectors grown and developed. Obviously, the forestry sector has very significant potential in relation to contributing to our climate change objectives as well, and to carbon capture, and also in terms of broadening out the types of forestry that we are planting, and increase in relation to native species and agroforestry as well. In relation to the Common Agricultural Policy, you touched on the importance that it would support farmers and complete the green transition. I think certainly when you look at the backdrop to CAP and when you look at our objectives now in relation to trying to ensure that everything we do is done in a sustainable way and done in a way that has consideration of its full, impact on biodiversity and the environment. I think the next CAP will very much be framed in that regard, and it will be important that it is intelligently structured to ensure that the way we produce food in this country, and as well across Europe, of course, as well, is done in a way that considers all aspects, but particularly contributes to the objectives in terms of improving the environment and biodiversity, while at the same time, of course, ensuring that incomes are supported and maintained and protected during that period, and doing that as well. You mentioned the eco schemes, and the point I referred in my opening contribution with regard to the potential for funds to be lost from the eco scheme. The new CAP proposals from the European Commission require that an eco scheme will be mandatory as part of Pillar 1. It's not clear yet whether there will be a minimum percentage of funds that would be allocated to that eco scheme within Pillar 1, but there is a real concern that we have, and I expressed it very strongly at the Ag Fish Council, or at the Council meeting last month, on the need to ensure that funds aren't lost in the process. Under the current proposals, there is a potential there that if the take-up of the eco scheme in Pillar 1 by farmers wasn't at a level that you expected, that the funds not used within Pillar 1 would actually revert to European level and wouldn't be reused within the Irish envelope. And that's not something I would want to see. I want to ensure that that doesn't happen. So obviously we want to encourage farmers into the eco scheme in Pillar 1. We want to make sure that it is something that it is a scheme that's going to be attractive to them. But we have to bear in mind that we want to ensure that the funds are not lost, and that they do go towards the objective of achieving environmental outcomes, but also delivering income for farmers in the process. You mentioned the importance as well for supporting the suckler sector and plans in relation to glass, and certainly, as I outlined, in relation to the existing schemes, and for that transition period, the importance of trying to ensure that we can continue to support those schemes. Deputy Collins mentioned in relation to the organic scheme for small farmers. Again, Deputy, that is the organics, increasing our organic footprint and the number of farmers that are in organic schemes is a key commitment in the programme for government, and will be something we will have a very strong eye to in relation to our policy and the various budgets that the government will be producing. The REP scheme, in terms of the timeline, you mentioned as well what's the timeline and what it will look like. Well, it's the timeline is that we would be looking at the option of commencing a pilot REP scheme next year, and looking at the options for that within the department, and obviously discussing that in great depth in terms of the funding of that as well with my government colleagues at the moment. Again, you mentioned the Mercosur deal, which I've covered. The 20%, I mentioned there was 20% still to be allocated within the rural development programme to be spent. So that's where that would be going. Deputy Collins is already indicated. It's a matter of making sure it's fully drawn down, which we always do as a country, and it's important, absolutely essential we do. And as I mentioned in my opening remarks, while we have drawn down 80% of it so far, the European average would be 60%, which would speak to the fact that we do have a very strong record in relation to ensuring that it is fully spent, and importantly so. You mentioned the fishing in relation to Brexit, and you're absolutely correct in relation to the real concerns that are rare, and particularly in recent days, we've seen the rhetoric increase as well in terms of the negotiations, and the UK government indicating it as something that they're looking to, they are seeking to make gains on, and certainly our position is very strong in relation to the importance of our fishery sector, ensuring that it is protected in the talks as they come hopefully to a successful conclusion. You also mentioned the statutory instrument, which was debated in the Dáil last week in relation to the introduction of penalty points, and as I know we debated it in great detail, it does go back to a regulation which was introduced in 2012 at EU level, which was an obligation in all of the EU maritime nations to ensure that they had a penalty point system in place to oversee vessels fishing within their waters, whether they be Irish vessels or international vessels. And we're the only country which hadn't yet implemented an S or a penalty point system. And we were in the position where we were being fined as well, funding from Europe because of that. And as a result of that, of course, the taxpayer was in the mix in relation to having to be having to pay up for that if it wasn't something we addressed. I know it is something that the fishing sector had concerns about. There have been a lot of engagement in that regard. There have been a number of amendments proposed by my own party, following on from a dull debate on the previous SI in 2018. Those amendments were considered in terms of whether they could be incorporated into a penalty point system while keeping us compliant with our obligations under the EU regulations that we had to implement. And there was 2 amendments which were accommodated in the USI. The other amendments were not regarded as being able to be accommodated and keep us compliant with our obligations at the same time. I have said to the fish producer organisations that I'm open to any submissions from them that they would wish to make to me with regard to any suggestions they'd have as to how we would remain compliant with, and accommodate any of those suggestions and changes which have been suggested. So my door is open in relation to discussing that with them, but the bottom line is we have to ensure we become compliant with our obligations to introduce a penalty point system. And this is something that has got very serious thought and consideration, which has led to the statutory instrument that has now been put in place. Senator Lombard mentioned the Food Ombudsman and plans around that, and certainly it is a key priority of mine. We've seen in the last year, 18 months in particular, Senator Lombard, the challenges that arise when there's a lack of trust in the food supply chain, and that led to the blockades of the factories previously, and very significant conflict between producers and the processing sector, and that's something that I'm very determined to actually try and address by bringing more transparency into the situation with regard to how prices price margins are overseen and the intelligence around that. There is an obligation on us to transpose unfair trading directives from EU level to national level by the middle of next year, and it would be my intention to have the Food Ombudsman having that responsibility, but also as well to give them price transparency responsibilities, and to try and ensure that we can oversee margins, but in particular to shine a light in that to show and ensure, and as far as possible, that farmers are getting a fair price domestically, given what the prices that are available are on the international market to which we export. And of course, we do export 90% of all our beef, so we're very dependent in relation to what the prices are that are available internationally. But the crucial thing is that is returned in the best way possible to our primary producers. You mentioned in relation to the serial testing for COVID and accountability as to where there's cases. Obviously, that is a matter for public health. There are similar responsibilities for all businesses in that regard, and is very much led from a public health point of view in terms of how those are communicated and also in terms of how those are managed. You mentioned the European Free Trade Agreement and the impact there with regard to Northern Ireland versus Republic of Ireland produce. That is something that requires further examination in terms of rules of origins and free trade agreements between the EU and third countries. That's an issue, and that's certainly is a complication of Brexit, and something I have an engagement with companies affected about, and will continue to engage very in detail on. You mentioned the climate legislation, which was discussed at Cabinet today and which is planned to be published this week. As you know, that it's clearly outlined the government approach in relation to the programme for government. The fact that overall we will be looking to achieve between now and 2030 7% emissions reductions, and also are signed up to the European Union 2050 obligations and also the UN and Paris obligations. The programme for government makes it very clear that has to take into full account the important economic and social role of agriculture in our own country, in terms of how we approach that, and also that it takes into account the scientific evidence from the IPCC with regard to the particularities of biogenic methane. You know, and I think that's, and certainly I've no doubt, I can confirm that the legislation will be consistent with the programme for government commitments in that regard. You mentioned calf exports and the importance of them, and absolutely I would agree they do form a very important part, Senator Lombard, of our beef market outlets. I think in relation to calves, it's also particularly important that we do ensure that in relation to the way our dairy herds are managed, that there is a lot more circular thinking in relation to the food supply chain in general, in relation to breeding, and in particular that the progeny coming off the dairy herd, that there is an eye to its value from a beef point of view. And I think going forward, it's really important that is given consideration to, and we do see more attention to that as well. Deputy Fitzmaurice asked in relation to Brexit and the engagement between our own department, the Department of Transport, regarding live exports. That is obviously something the EU are working, teasing out in terms of their engagement with the UK, but it is something certainly we have given considerable thought to with our European partners. You mentioned tariffs on cattle and tariffs on sheep. Obviously that's entirely dependent on the nature of the free trade agreement that comes out of the negotiations, and our hope would be that it would be tariff-free and quota-free. And in relation to the withdrawal agreement and the Northern Ireland protocol, that would provide for a one island from a food point of view, and from that it would be tariff-free as well. You also mentioned in relation to the Banner project, which I responded to earlier in relation to Deputy Cahill, and that our department will consider any submissions and does expect submissions with regard to it in the near future. You mentioned the PGA applications and the potential delays in relation to those. I know that is something that we've seen progress on in the last year or two. I think it offers great potential for the period ahead, and any PGA applications that are being received will receive and are receiving consideration by the department. You'll also be aware of the very significant engagement at the moment as well through the Beef Market Task Force in relation to the PGI proposal being put forward by Board BIA, and that's something which is important that all farm organisations liaise with on, and because ultimately in terms of how we go forward, PGIs need to have farmers fully behind them, but they also need to have industry and the state working at one in terms of promoting them and trying to ensure that they do result in as much of a premium as can be possible when the produce is sold. You mentioned the suckler cow supports, and again I touched on that earlier, and the importance of supporting that sector and during the transition period, but particularly as well in terms of how we consider that is done as part of the next CAP strategic plan. Likewise with regard to young farmers and TAMs in relation to convergence. You'll be aware that the European Commission have indicated that over the course of the next CAP programme that would move to 75%. That's certainly something that would fully support. There's a wider issue and discussion to be had in relation to whether that would go any further, and that's something that I would engage and discuss very broadly on before any decision will be made in that regard. In relation to the PCS numbers from the department for sanitisation. There is a delay there, which I'm aware of it. It is arisen because of the increased number of applications due to COVID for such products. There has been additional staff allocated to that task and purpose, and the department will be doing our best to try and address that backlog, Deputy Fitzmaurice. In relation to forestry and timber, again, as you know, it's something we've given a lot of attention to in the last 2 weeks. There's been real significant issues there in terms of a backlog of licences, and that's something we certainly hope that the legislation will resolve. And I would thank and acknowledge the cooperation of all parties and the independent members as well in relation to facilitating that legislation to be discussed importantly in the Dáil and the Shannon over the last 2 weeks, and again the cooperation of the chair of the committee as well in that regard. You raised the issue of TB categorisation of animals, and it's something I called a TB forum to discuss. Last week we had a very constructive discussion for Deputy Fitzmaurice, and it's something I've asked for bilaterals between the farming organisations and my department to discuss further, and I think it's really important we do now ensure that there's a new TB strategy developed in the next short number of weeks, because the situation we've seen in recent times in relation to the increase in TB numbers and infections is something which is causing tremendous hardship on farms, is leading to significant income loss, and also costing the state significantly. The projections are that over the next 10 years, for example, we would see the TB scheme cost the state €1 billion. Now, there's a lot of things we could do with €1 billion in the farming sector, but we'll be spending €1 billion as things stand in relation to the TB testing and eradication scheme. And, that's a very, very significant spend. And it is something we need to, when that level of investment has been put in, we need to see it achieving numbers going down rather than numbers going up. We had seen numbers go down significantly in the past, the last 2 or 3 years. They've been going the opposite direction.